security. This year, we will be celebrating 60 years of Kenya's independence. So Kenya turned 60, and one of the things that the founders of this nation talked about is that as the base of their curriculum was to exterminate three things: illiteracy, poverty, and disease. One of those things that is poverty is quite close to what we're talking about tonight, this morning. That is, of course, poverty in terms of the government's responsibility and role in feeding this nation.
Collaboration of all the stakeholders in this industry, because as a government, as a ministry, we cannot achieve this alone. We need to work together. We need to work as a team, both public, private, development partners, so we can realize this big objective of the ministry. So with those few remarks, allow me to take you through the Principal Secretary's remarks. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am deeply honored to attend this conference that is coinciding with the 50th anniversary of CAS collaboration with Kenya. It is also gratifying to note that food security is one of the thematic areas for deliberation in this conference. This is a clear recognition of agriculture as one of the most important sectors for our country's socio-economic transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, Kenya, like many other developing nations, is experiencing a dynamic transformation in its demographic landscape. With a population that is steadily expanding, our food needs have surged, placing considerable strain on our agricultural systems and resources. Additionally, the country has experienced negative impacts of climate change, which has impacted on food and nutrition security, especially in the ASAL areas. According to the August 2023 findings of the long range assessment, 17%, around 2.7 million people in the ASAL counties were facing high acute food insecurity. This marks a significant decrease from the previous assessment in February 2023, which indicated 4.4 million people were facing acute food insecurity. The importance of proactive measures to address the evolving food requirements cannot therefore be underscored. Ensuring access to adequate and nutritious food is not merely a privilege, but a moral obligation that we owe to each and every member of our nation. Prices of food commodities are affected by various processes along the food supply chain, as well as the food environment. Global trade also affects price of food commodities in Kenya. The past year has seen some progress in food production. However, the staple food prices are still above average in most markets due to low local food availability following successive below average previous harvests. Containing basic food commodity prices is paramount to averting both economic hardships and social unrest. The sustenance of our people and the stability of our economy are intertwined with the availability and affordability of essential food items. In order to manage basic food commodity prices, there is need for a multifaceted and integrated approach, which also combines short-term interventions with long-term strategies. The strategies used must strike a balance between the interests of consumers and producers, while also addressing the key factors that are driving up the food prices. Ladies and gentlemen, the government has implemented various strategies to contain and stabilize the prices of basic food commodities and ensure that essential food items remain affordable. Kenya government monitors the prices of essential food commodities regularly, and acts to prevent unjustified price hikes. Regulatory bodies, such as the Competition Authority of Kenya, are responsible for enforcing regulations that prevent price manipulation and anti-competitive practices in the food supply chain. Market monitoring and information dissemination to producers, consumers, and policymakers to facilitate informed decision-making. The government is investing in infrastructure, transportation, and storage facilities to reduce post-harvest losses and ensure smooth distribution of food commodities. In order to mitigate perennial food availability, the government is in the process of revamping the national strategic food reserves to help stabilize prices by releasing supply during times of scarcity. To bridge food deficits, the government has been implementing trade policies that allow for the import of essential food commodities during shortages or supply gaps. Consumer education is also carried out to ensure that consumers are able to make cost-effective decisions when purchasing food and wheat flour. The government has adjusted trade policies from time to time, as you may be aware, such as waiving duty to ensure adequate supply of essential items in the domestic market, especially during periods of scarcity. The government is also implementing the agriculture sector transformation and growth strategy, which focuses on increasing agricultural productivity, promoting value addition in the agricultural sector, and enhancing market access for farmers. The strategy emphasizes the importance of crop diversification, livestock farming, and agribusiness development. The government, through the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, has committed to drive economic and inclusive growth through agricultural value chain approach. Priority commodity value chains have been identified to enhance food production, reduce food imports, and enhance exports. The better approach strategy is envisaged to transform the agricultural sector by increasing productivity and thus reducing the cost of food. Ladies and gentlemen, despite the efforts by the government and stakeholders, despite the efforts by the government and stakeholders to ensure that basic commodities, food commodities remain affordable and accessible, challenges such as weather-related factors, market distortions, global price fluctuations have negatively impacted the effectiveness of these measures. The rising food requirements and prices in Kenya is a call to action that requires a collective effort from all sectors of society. The duty of feeding our nation is for all of us, and the clarion call is to rise to the occasion and ensure that we support all the actors in food systems for our sake and the sake of the future generation. As we navigate through these challenging times, it is imperative that we come together to devise effective strategies to ensure food and nutrition security and manage the cost of basic commodities. We must transform food systems to reduce the cost of nutritious food and increase the affordability of healthy diets. Collaboration between government agencies, private sector, producer associations, and the civil society too is required to collectively address price management and forthcoming challenges. Interactions such as this conference are indispensable forums that foster collaborations and partnerships. In conclusion, allow me to appreciate the organizers and all the stakeholders of this conference for their effort, time and resources towards making sure that this event is a success. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you so much, Director. Another round of applause, please. We can do better than that for Director Douglas Kangi. We are going to the panel discussion now. I'd like to call my panelists onto the stage. Kindly, as I do that, kindly remember to keep the conversations ongoing online. The hashtags across the online platforms is Transforming a Nation 2023, hashtag CAS Kenya. And of course, if you're on X or Twitter, you can follow at CAS_Kenya. Kindly. All right. We're going to take, is this working? Take the next 60 minutes or so to go through a very important subject in this country. That is, of course, feeding the nation and containing prices of basic commodities. And joining me to take us through some of the discussions. It's a very wide topic. We'll try to cover as much as possible. I'm joined here by Anthony Ambugo on my extreme left, CEO of Water Service Providers Association, WASPA. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Also, next to him is Professor Richard Odor, Registrar, Research, Innovation, and Product Development at Kenyatta University. Thanks, Prof, for joining us. Next to him is Dr. Robert Kibugi, Senior Lecturer, Faculty of Law at the University of Nairobi. Thanks, Dr. And of course, next to me is Peris Mungare, the County Executive Committee member in charge of Agriculture, Livestock, and Fisheries in the County of Nyamira from the year 2013 to 2022, total of 9 years. Thanks, Madam Waziri, for joining us this afternoon. We have 4 subtopics to tackle. That is the GMO question, something that has been talked about quite extensively in this country. We'll talk about containing the prices of basic commodities, and the issue of land use and its effect on food security, as well as food processing, value addition, and supply chain management. To try to cover that as much as we can. So let's get right into it. The GMO question has been quite emotive in this country. Over the last 10 years, we have had court battles. It has been challenged a couple of times. And then a couple of months ago, the government lifted the ban on GMO commodities in this country. Prof, let me begin with you. Is GMO the solution for food security in this country?
Thank you, Ben. And again, I'm very grateful for the invitation to participate in this. Well, I like the question. And every time we are in panels like this, where the first question is it the solution? And I can tell you, it is not the only solution. And this is something that must be said very actively. GMO is a technology that helps in certain specific constraints that need to be solved. It is more or less like saying, if you have tractors that are important as part of the production, equipment, and you use it to plow, and you plant the seeds that are susceptible to diseases and pests, then clearly it doesn't matter whether you use the tractor or what to plant. So that is when the GMO comes in. In the earlier discussion that we had, I liked the definition of technology, not only to think about IT, but to start thinking about technology as a way, a tool that helps to enhance production. Now, in genetic engineering, a tool that actually leads to GMO development, it is important to appreciate that it is about empowering the seed so that it overcomes environmental constraints. And also for us to understand that if a GM seed was made or developed against drought, for instance, then the pests can still attack it unless you also empower it against the pest. And there's a lot more of confusion around the GMO. And I must say, Ben, that I make GMO for this country. I have a training in molecular biology and genetic engineering, and also in drug discovery with Pfizer. So I sit in a privileged platform of understanding the health bit and also the development of it. Every time you talk about GMO, people think that it's coming from the West. Yet at Kenyatta University, a university where I serve as the registrar of research, from 2005 to now, those are 18 years, we have been developing genetically modified crops against drought. I have that. We've got patents for this, against the reduced levels of cyanide from cassava that kills some people who are not tolerant to it. We are dealing with striga, which is a parasitic weed, and many others. And later on, I hope I'll get the opportunity to demystify and unpack what really GMO is, so that we stop demystifying it because of lack of what exactly it is. And I'm able to. So if I had more time, probably I go ahead or later.
Yes, you can basically, in a nutshell, tell us what exactly is GMO.
When you talk about a GMO product, look at anything that is alive as in the genome of it, you only have 4 letters. You have a T, an A, a G, and a C. Those are the only 4 letters in the DNA, in the nucleus, which has got both RNA and DNA. But let me explain it. Anything that is alive, be it a plant, be it an insect, be it us, in our DNA, in our genome, we have those letters repeating themselves in a sequence. So these 4 letters I'm talking about, in a human being, in a cell, there are 3.2 billion of those letters. Now, luckily, we are at a point where we have sequenced anything that is alive, we can sequence those letters. And that therefore means that you are able to get to know what section of this sequence is responsible for what. Now, genetic engineering is very interesting. And if you follow the rule of the third law, Isaac Newton's third law of motion, anything, a reaction and action are equal and opposite. This is what it means. That the world as it is has everything enough for all of us at any given time. And that is why when there is drought here, like we had in this country previously, there was flood in Nigeria. And I am talking because somebody else is listening. And we are sitting because somebody somewhere is standing. That is the law. And therefore, when we talk about genetic engineering, we are saying if there is a drought here in Kenya or in Nairobi, somewhere there is a plant that is drought tolerant. And I'll break it down further. For instance, the cactus, it's tolerant to drought. Maize is not. But if you take maize and cactus and try to cross them naturally, it can't happen. It cannot happen. Why? Because cactus is a different species and maize is a different species. But in their genome, the letters are similar and they can be cut. Now, as genetic engineers, what do? And this is the only technology we talk about. We are able to sequence the genome of the cactus and realize probably the roots are longer. Right. And that is why it's touching water down there. So we cut that section of the DNA responsible for root elongation. That is what you move now to maize, for instance, and make the roots longer. You have not touched the kernel, you have not touched anything, but that at that particular point it is called GMO, and it is really so bad, in quotes. And let me unpack it further so that we understand. When you are eating githeri, githeri is a mixture of beans and maize. In your mouth, and I was watching you when you were taking that break, I didn't see any person removing the DNA of the sausage and because you are eating them with the DNA. What happened? So in your mouth, when you are eating a mixture of maize and beans in your mouth, that is genetically mixed in there. You are eating beans because you want proteins from it, and you are eating maize because you want carbohydrates. Now, this is what genetic engineering does. When there is climate change, like we are talking now, where there is a disease that is attacking beans, for instance, we, as human beings, still need the proteins. So, and you cannot cross maize and beans to get binomaize, something like that. It doesn't work. So genetic engineers, what we do, we go into the genome of beans, which you naturally eat. and identify the section of that bean that is responsible for protein, that is what you move to maize. At that particular point, your maize will be having proteins, which you naturally eat,
Right.
and also carbohydrates in it. At that particular point, that maize is supposed to be called GMO, and it is so bad it causes cancer. It is not true.
All right. Thanks, Prof, for that very good explanation and breaking down for us. Mr. Ambugo, going deeper into it, now the government lifted the ban on GMO foods against the backdrop of one of the worst droughts we've had for a while. Are GMO crops the answer to this issue of drought with failing rainfall and all?
I think Prof has explained it very well, and he said it is not the only solution, but is part of the solution. And I think he has demystified it, because how we get it outside there is we are told that it is not good for human health. But it's succinctly clear that what is being done is to improve maybe the tolerance or the protein content or what is suitable in that what you want. So I think I've not delved much into it, but it's very clear from what Prof has said.
Can it solve for us the issue of rain-fed agriculture versus irrigation? Because clearly, with global warming and everything, we do not have enough rain, and we have this drought coming ever so often now. Is it a solution? Is it part of something that can help policymakers?
Yeah, I think it is important because of the unprecedented global challenge of climate change. We have realized that rain-fed agriculture is not enough to provide food security. And that is why we are moving now into irrigated agriculture. But the question is, do we have enough water resources? And as it is said, one, as it is raining now, rainwater is wasted. If you look at surface water, it's polluted. And if you look at groundwater, it is depleted. And 70% of these fresh water resources are used for agriculture. So it's very interesting statistics that if you look at water in itself, is the most abundant substance on planet Earth. But paradoxically, we are struggling even as a nation. We don't have enough fresh resources for even drinking water. In fact, as a nation, we are categorized as a water scarce country because the per capita that is required, the UN threshold is 1,000 cubic meters. What do we have? 5 years ago, it was at 452. And that is why of rain harvesting, but also equally at the local level and county level, we are saying, why don't you make it compulsory when people, you are approving maybe buildings, that roof catchment should be a necessity. It should be mandatory. Like I can give you an example. If it rains in 2 hours in Nairobi, then you will realize that this is already a floodplain. But look at the buildings around. How many people are doing water harvesting? So I think in terms of food security, it is important to look at the water security.
All right.
So in terms of fresh water resources, we don't have adequate fresh water resources. And that is why now we need to build resilience. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Kibugi, one of the reasons why GMO is so emotive has been this debate on like Prof mentioned, the misconceptions of what it does. I don't know, a man will develop some certain organs and all those things that have been cited by policymakers and politicians. But some people say they are real worries. So do you think there are enough biosafety measures put in by government, in this case, to to make sure GMO is safe?
Well, thank you very much for the question and also for having me here. Interestingly, Prof and I earlier in the year had the hard duty of appearing on behalf of our respective universities in front of Parliament. And to answer, this is when this whole issue blew up. And we were tasked with answering the same questions, and actually at the time I was asked to walk them through the legislative and institutional framework for GMOs. And again, listening to the scientists. And without boring everybody here with the whole legal architecture of it, my conclusion at the moment, and I guess the Environment and Land Court takes the same view in light of recent decisions, is that what we might have legal provisions and institutional mandates that need a bit of panel beating, but what we have actually is a significant trust deficit between the government of the Republic of Kenya and its population and its citizens, in that it should be adequate, generally speaking, when the State Department of Agriculture that our friend Douglas represents, or the ministry responsible for technology says that this is safe. The Biotechnology or Biosafety Authority has reviewed this, NEMA has reviewed this, scientists at Kenyatta University or University of Nairobi tell us it's safe. It should be adequate for the public to believe institutions of state. But that's not happening, and it's now taking people going through a judicial process for the courts to say, let the government do what it is supposed to do, etc. And so I think that the larger problem is not that the guardrails and safeguards are not adequate. It is that the government of Kenya needs to do enough to reduce the gap between what it says and what the population believes. And I don't know what informs this, but when you go to social media or you are in a social setting, you will see the reaction people have is more driven by fear and being skeptical rather than being driven by, because I'll be inclined to believe the scientist telling me that, but another person would be, and who is that scientist paid by? You know, those kinds of questions. And I'm not sure that's really a legal issue or it's a scientific issue, but it's a public administration question that needs to be addressed. But I agree that, as explained by scientists, it would help reduce certain gaps that are in place, but the ethical questions, the safety questions need to be answered in a manner that the public actually believes, because if it doesn't, then it sort of fails the objective here, which is to contribute to public food security and adequacy. Yes.
Thanks, Dr. Ms. Mongare, about a quarter of the county governments, 47 of them, have reportedly embraced GMO crops. Talk to us about the role of county governments. What is the future of GMO in as far as the devolved units are concerned?
Thank you, Ben, for having me here. I think I would like to thank Prof for enlightening all of us. First, what is there, from what Prof has said, there is a gap on information between science and the public, and also the perception. So as you've said, county governments have embraced GMO like BT cotton, and it's doing well. And this actually, we are not saying that we'll eat the cotton, but if you sell the cotton, you can be able to access the foodstuffs and all that, and achieve food security. So what we need to really embrace, as counties need to embrace, is partner or collaborate with the research institutions, the academia, because there's rich information there about this GMO and its safety, because what the public there are saying is about the safety. And also county governments need to invest in research and embrace the technologies are there so that we can elevate food security.
Thank you, Mr. Mwari. Before we go to the next issue or theme in this in food security, Prof, very quickly, how less reliant would Kenya be on rain-fed agriculture if we are to embrace as a country fully GM crops?
Well, reliance on water is just one function or an input that is critical in agriculture. And it does not guarantee yield. That is why irrigation alone cannot guarantee yield. So even if you irrigate, you will still require the right seed that is protected against pests and diseases. And even after that, you still need to do agronomic practices, which is weeding, and it has to be on time. But even before that, you needed to have prepared your soil correctly, and therefore what the government is doing about the fertilizer is critical in terms of treating the quality and the nutrients of the soil, very critical. But even after harvesting, there is again something we call post-harvest losses, which is also very critical. So reliance on water or irrigation is not a guarantee. It requires a holistic approach that starts from the process of the soil preparation all through the value chain up to harvesting and post-harvest. How do we handle our maize? Half the time we get enough quantities, yields of maize from Rift Valley. But after that, we are storing them very poorly, and therefore aflatoxin jumps in. You harvest cassava, but then you have not taken care of processing and value addition because it degenerates very quickly. You probably have planted maize in a soil that shouldn't be for maize. It should be, for instance, you will find in northeastern, in central, in Ukambani, somebody is struggling with planting maize while that area is just good for, mung beans and jahe and all this. And yet you are still stuck on maize. And also the most important thing is also to look at our social structure. In Kenya, if we miss maize, we start claiming there is no food. And that is not true. Really, maize cannot be the only source of carbohydrates. It cannot be. And therefore, what happened to our sweet potato? What happened to the cassava? What happened to the finger millet? And this is a very important bit, Ben, that we have to figure out as Africans. We are so rigid in our eating platform. Like, if you come from the Western or from Luo area like myself, you are supposed to be eating ugali and fish. Those are the only two things. And you are not very, you don't like eating githeri. You feel that is too central. And you don't like, and that is a problem. Why? Because then you are restricted and creating pressure on maize. I am a biochemist, I can tell you for sure that a glucose that is coming from maize is the same glucose that is coming from, cassava, and the same that is coming from sugarcane and all that. So in summary, Ben, we need to figure out a holistic approach from the soil through to agronomic practices, through to post-harvest, and how do we add value on this? Very, very critical.
Thanks, Prof. Lastly, Daktari, we have seen the Law Society of Kenya, which you're a member of. They challenged the government's decision to lift the ban on GMO foods. In just 1 minute only, is this over? Is this fight really over? Of course, that petition was overturned by the land court. Is this battle over? Very quickly.
Well, I will not speak on behalf of the LSK for purposes of whether or not they would appeal the decision, etc. But like I said earlier, the view taken by the court should not be taken to justify avoiding the questions that arose. And this is the questions that brought us here, that in 2012, a legitimate government of Kenya put the whole GMO infrastructure on hold. They said they had questions, isn't it? In 2023, another legitimately elected government in Kenya reverses the position, but did it address the questions that were raised? Remember that the government of President Kibaki did this on its own motion. There was no public petitions raising these issues on a serious scale, isn't it? So it would be very useful that even as we do this, we address these questions, and as you put it, we bridge the gap between the science and the people, the knowledge and the people, and the doubts.
Right.
Can we address those doubts that the public has? And I think we could, yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Ari. It is a very wide topic. If at the end of this panel discussion, we'll have a couple of minutes for questions from the audience. If you have any question on GMO, kindly hold on to them. Not now, at the end of the discussion. I'll be coming to you. I want us to move on to something that is very current, that is the food of basic commodities. And if I can start with you, Madam Mung'are, food is very expensive in Kenya, and something that is very closely tied to it is agriculture, which is a devolved function. Why is food, from where you see it in your opinion, why is food so expensive in this country?
As you've clearly said, thank you, agriculture is a devolved function. And this country, agriculture, as we know, is the mainstay, is the backbone. So we have to support agriculture. Unfortunately, we don't. We find that like the Malabo 2014 declaration on financing of agriculture, 10% is not adhered to. And thus, you find that productivity per unit area goes down, giving rise to food prices, because if agriculture is not funded, extension services shall not reach the farmer, and then they cannot adopt the technologies because they are not even aware. This has not been disseminated to them. That's one area, because we have to sort out that extension services. It used to be like 1 to 400, the ratio to farmer, but these days you find like even in the most county governments, even up to 1,000. So which means we cannot improve our productivity if we don't adopt even these technologies. And then you also find that when we talk about investing in agriculture, we have to have research also. And collaborate, if I repeat on that, with the research institutions so that we can have these technologies to increase our food security and to diversify, not only to say that we cannot eat a banana and sleep. You have slept hungry, like in our home. We say, where I grew up, if you eat bananas, you have slept like that, to literally translate whatever. So we need to do that. And then subsidies. We are not going to say, like the better government has done, it's not subsidizing the prices, the food prices, subsidy of fertilizer, the inputs to the farmer. And once we subsidize to make it sustainable, the farmer should move from subsistence to commercialization so that he can plow back, not every time to wait for the subsidy. And other things, it's like now we have a challenge, like the fuel prices. We can also look for other alternative sources of like energy and all that, and value adding these products so that we can have more, the farmer can have more in his pocket. So the crucial thing is that we should take agriculture seriously as a nation, so that we can have a difference.
All right. Prof, speaking of subsidies that you mentioned, the previous government had some interesting food subsidies, but the current government revoked the subsidies on food prices, saying they will subsidize production instead. The farm inputs, like she mentioned, is it working?
Well, it's too early to conclude whether it's working or not, but from where I sit, I think you need a combination of two. Prices of commodities are actually controlled by several things. And there are different strategies that governments use or individuals use to do this. There could be subsidies, that's one. There is price ceiling. And also there are instances where you are putting regulations that speak to the importation and exportation. All those things put together are likely to figure out how the prices will go. But more importantly, in agriculture and in food commodities, it's all about how much did you put in the production and how does it reflect in your costing. Because regardless of the situation, you must make profit. And particularly if you are doing agriculture for commercialization. If it is just small-scale agriculture that we do for feeding yourself, then you actually lose out of even getting to know how much you put in and what is being given out. I feel that it is a good idea that we are subsidizing, say, fertilizer, but that is not enough. Because if you subsidize fertilizer and you are throwing it on a soil whose content you don't know, do we do soil testing? Because it's not obvious, automatic, that all the soils do not have nutrients. They do. So first of all, it starts from the data that the meteorological department gives us as a country. So if, like last time, they said there will be some rain, El Nino heavy rains, and it will start in October and the peak will be in November. But soon after, we didn't see a lot of it in October, and then we started celebrating and saying they were lying, actually. Now look at where we are. How did we use that data? And when that was happening, to what extent do we then profile the country, even with these subsidies, and say, this is X area, the soil is tested, so that you get to know what fertilizer are you adding, because you need that. But you cannot provide fertilizer and you don't have the extension officers. If previously the number was 1 to 400 farmers, right now we are talking about 1 extension officer to over 1,000 farmers. Do you know what that means? You have fertilizer, you don't even know how to apply it, because even the contact of this fertilizer to the crop itself burns it instead of helping it. So who is giving this information? So yes, let's subsidize, but let's also accompany that with a lot more of information building capacity of farmers, even to know, because fertilizers are fertilizers, but fertilizer targeted to a crop is different. If you are adding fertilizer to beans, is it the same to maize? Is it the same for cassava? And therefore, what are we doing in the whole value chain? And that is very, very critical. So subsidies is fine, but it cannot also be forever. Subsidies are short-term things that are supposed to intervene in circumstances where there are complexities that require them.
Mr. Ambugo, from a water perspective, the government can subsidize the farm inputs, the fertilizers and all, but it cannot legislate for weather patterns. If there's drought, if you subsidize fertilizer, then there's drought. Or especially when you're talking about the food basket areas, the North Rifts and so on and so forth. And we are having El Nino, which means we are likely to have post-harvest losses because there's not enough time for the maize to dry and all that. How is this a weakness of the subsidy on production from where you sit?
Yeah, from where I sit, subsidies are not sustainable, even within the water space, as the professors put it. They are short-term measures. And why we have the Vision 2030, this is a national development blueprint. And you have the pillars clearly. So I think in terms of strategic and long-term planning, that is very, very important, because we are talking about from the speech that 48% of the land is arable. But what percentage of land has been put under irrigated agriculture? Because we say we cannot rely on rain-fed. And we know because of the climate change of erratic rainfall patterns. But you realize that water is very important. As much as you want to subsidize and there is no water, then you are going to have crop failure. So it is in terms of long-term and long-range planning on how you want to address the issue of food security in this country. So irrigated agriculture is one of the solutions. But even if you move forward, the other issue is for you also to look at the water itself and the issues of water quality. Not all water that is available is suitable for agriculture. You see, that is another challenge, because we have massive water resources in Turkana underground. But if you look at the exploration borehole, the water is saline. But that water has the ability to serve the entire nation.
Is water desalination something the government can
yes,
efficiently work on?
Different parts of the world. Go to Dubai. Dubai is a desert, but it's 98% covered in terms of drinking water. They're just doing desalination. So this myth of desalination is expensive is expensive has been demystified. Go to Israel. They were relying on a freshwater Sea of Galilee. It almost became extinct. They shifted and went to the Mediterranean Sea. They have around 4 plants, but what they have invoked is that they have used recycle, reuse, reduce, and reclaim in the entire value chain. So you find as you desalinate, you find there is high cost of energy, but you find that the effluent that is produced is recycled, improved, and it goes into sustainable agriculture. So to me, I think sustainable solutions are very important. I'll give you an example. Look at our behavior at the household level. We produce gray water, which is 80%. When you have washed clothes, where do you take that water that you have rinsed the clothes with? Look at that water, it's still gray. It's not very dirty. It's not black water. So if we are able to get that water and recycle it, you find it that it can come into reuse and reduce even the pressure on resources. So to me, I look at it in terms of planning. We are talking of 100 dams, which is good. There's Chemususu Dam here, I think, in Baringo. But no single drop of water has left the dam 10 years ago. So as you plan, you also look at last mile connectivity. I've done a dam. Has the water reached the people in terms of drinking? Has the water been piped in terms of irrigated agriculture? So to me, it is a whole cycle of planning and considering various aspects. That's when you can get the advantages of economies of scale. Look at, I think it's Zimbabwe, Mganagwa the other day, and Bingu Mutharika in Malawi. Because we believe that if you don't eat ugali, then you have not eaten food. Then they went into massive production of maize. Then they say the country is food secure. But I've also been in other parts of the country where I missed ugali for the last 10 days. Then when I came back, it was difficult for me to eat ugali. Then I realized we can survive without ugali. So it's a total paradigm shift. You just believe, because I'm from the Luya nation and we respect ugali. We don't hide that.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Daktari, back to the issue of subsidies before we move on to something else. For you, subsidy on production or subsidy on food prices?
You know, subsidies on commodities will always be justifiable in emergency circumstances. When we have a drought that, decimates our production, when we have a pest infestation like desert locust or fall armyworms that for the best circumstance, best effort, we couldn't do anything, etc. Or when we had COVID. In emergency circumstances, subsidies should be justifiable because then we have to protect the baseline. We must make sure that our people don't fall into crisis in that situation. And we've seen measured subsidies work in this country at different times, isn't it? Directly or indirectly, including the effort made during 2020 to lower income tax rates for people to bring money into pockets. However, agreeing with my fellow panelists that when it comes to agriculture production, we've got several vulnerabilities in our system that we can address some with subsidies, like providing best quality disease-free seeds and even fertilizer, etc. But there are structural problems that we need to deal with. I'll give you 2 examples. One is soil acidity. For decades, if you speak to your parents and anybody's parents who've been doing smallholder farming, they'll swear by diammonium phosphate fertilizer, DAP, isn't it? But if you go around the country, farmers are busy burning up organic waste to generate ash that they can mix with the soil as they try to add a rudimentary alkaline base to the soil, even as they go ahead to use DAP, isn't it? And that raises the question of soil testing that Prof was talking about. It doesn't matter whether you provide the best GMO seeds or you provide subsidies for anything. But if the soil problem across the country is continuously acidic, this is going to cause harm to a lot of people. The second issue is post-harvest losses. a big part of this country, the Rift Valley and part of the Western Belt, uses the March, April, May, and the June, July, August, September rainfalls to produce food. And they normally harvest around this time. And they normally have that discretionary third season where people can do fast-growing seeds. But it's raining like it's never rained before in a long time, isn't it? So what will happen with the drying of the food crop right now? We knew this was going to happen. So question would be, no matter how much, are we going to start subsidizing food crops again, food again, because we have lost food crops to post-harvest losses? This is an issue. And then drought. Drought is no longer a surprise in this country. The Ministry of Agriculture will tell us that the 2014-2018 drought quickly became the 2019-2022-23 drought, right? The nastiest in 40 years. We have got a season of rain this year. We don't know the predictions coming on to 2024. The rain right now is mainly because of the current changes in the Indian Ocean. These are subject to warming in the ocean, etc. And maybe next year they'll direct the cyclones back to Southern Africa. We don't know yet. So we have temporarily addressed the water question. And we can speak more about that when we get to the question of land fragmentation, just so I don't take too long. But what happens when, again, the March, April, May rainfalls in 2024 fail? What are we going to do? Subsidize? Again, there are structural problems. Yes, climate change makes them worse, but they have been here with us. And agriculture policy and food security policy needs to wake up to some of these challenges, because the parents that raise a farm, they are simply not equipped to cope with the drought that ravages for 4 years. They will just end up selling household assets. Those cows that give them milk, they'll just and stop.
Right.
Yes.
Thanks, Dr. Ari. Another issue that makes it harder for the country to provide ugali, Prof, I'm coming to you, ugali, quote unquote, for their people, is the issue of land fragmentation. The fact that we don't have big enough land for any meaningful production of food. From where you sit, where did the brain start beating us in terms of over-fragmenting of this land? Where did this belief come from that you need very big parcels of land for owning individually, rather than using it as a factor of production?
Thank you, Ben. It is sad that many of us have traveled other parts of the world and we've seen how their agriculture is organized. You will realize that people are concentrated in a particular area and the rest of the land is left for agriculture, because you don't need to spot each and every parcel with a small home. Instead, you would rather concentrate the people within particular areas where you can supply them with water and all the social amenities that are critical, and then you leave them, release the land now for agriculture. It is so sad. I think land has been over time for us in Africa. I think it started from the pre-colonial times when we were fighting, and remember when we were requesting for independence, a lot more was about land. And therefore, when we got our independence, there was this, and still is, a lot of attachment to land, and you need to own as much as possible for yourself, which is so sad. You look at even the cost of the land in this country, and particularly the metropolitan area, it is crazy, and it's not even making sense. That is why the rest of the world has decided to go a little higher up, because there is no limitation on how far high up you can go. Then you leave the ground for agriculture. This is what's the most unfortunate thing. As you continue fragmenting the land, what it leads to smaller land sizes or farm sizes. And when that happens, two things are likely to happen. One, first of all, you don't benefit from the economies of scale, which comes with the bigger chunk of land. And then the second thing is that you also are compromised in terms of adopting the modern agricultural practices, because you require, for instance, even if we go to the processes of the newer technologies, we are talking about remote sensing, where I need to get to know at what point do I irrigate. If you have, say, 1,000 acres of land, the most convenient thing you will do is just to release water so that it actually waters, irrigates the entire 1,000 acres. And that is very wrong. Through remote sensing, the plant itself should give you signals, and we can map that through pigmentation to get to know what does it exactly require, so that you release water only for that section that requires it, because the soil does not evaporate at the same pace and is also different. So that is when we talk about the precision agriculture, machine learning, AI, and right now even sending, you would make sure that the soil is put with technologies right now that can send you a SMS to let you know, I'm missing this. I don't see phosphorus here. I'm not seeing X amount of nutrients on the soil. And it can send SMSs because you only put the chips. That is the kind of discussion we are talking about here. So fragmentation, unfortunately, has really made agriculture very, very difficult. Thank you. So what then that means is that we need to first of all make the agriculture trendy, because earlier on the discussion we had is that we have a better percentage of our population being the youth. And be it as it may, that is a very good thing, because then we need to figure out how do we make the agriculture trendy and swaggy for these youth. Because most of them don't understand that our farmers are aging, and the youth want white-collar jobs. They want to TikTok additional fertilizer, and they want to hashtag seeds. It doesn't happen like that. The seed must be physically be put on the soil for it to work. And therefore, how do you then make it trendy for them? Yeah, you cannot weed via Bluetooth. Weeding requires that you target the weeds actually and uproot them, literally. So those are some of the things, and that is where technology comes in. So because we needed to make weeding more trendy, and this is what the biotechnology again does. If you have 1 million acres, and I want to break it down for you, 1 million acres of maize, that means that you're almost moving from here to Naivasha, which is quite a bit of time. When you plant your maize, if you start weeding now, physically weeding, it will take you almost a month or two, and you need almost 1 million people to start doing an acre every day. So that is not possible. So what has technology done? That is when you bring this thing, you hear people talking about Roundup. Roundup, by put your seeds, make your maize tolerant to the Roundup, so that you allow your maize and the weeds to just grow. Then what do? You fly on top of 1 million acre with, by a plane that has got Roundup. You spray it on top of everything, your maize together with the weeds. So the weeds die, the maize remains surviving, and that is artificial weeding, which will make sense for the youth here. And at that particular point, do you know that is called GMO, and it is so bad. So overall, what I'm trying to say here, Ben, is that let's appreciate the fact that we are small-scale farmers, and we need to think very actively around how do we come up with policies, and I know Legal Mind is here, that can allow us to concentrate this and solidify or consolidate the pieces of land to allow us have relatively bigger chunks of land. That promotes agriculture.
Right. Mr. Mungari, how big is this problem in terms of food security? Some areas, obviously, in the country are more fragmented than others. Central Kenya, for instance, smaller parcels of land for farming. The Kisii region, where you served as a CAC for agriculture. What's the ratio? What is the ratio of the land fragmentation to the level of food insecurity, so to speak?
Actually, I could say it is high. I really want to give a figure, but it can even go to 80%, especially of population pressure on the land in those areas you've said. Because you find that the population's 80% rely on agriculture and all that. So this is unfortunate because families can avoid fragmentation or the subdivision of land and farm together, so that it will be economical to be able to employ technologies like machinery and all that, so that they get the economic benefit out of this land. So, and in the cities like now, you said Kiambu, you find that it's so serious that you find that land that is for coffee is going to settlement and all that. And so we are losing out in agriculture in that cash crop. So this is really a rampant thing. And as it is, we need to have policies in place to address this as case that has been talked about places like Israel, where people stay together and they are able to farm and they have the infrastructure for that. So policy can address this fragmentation.
Speaking of policy, Dr. Kibugi, does Kenya's approach to land management need serious reconsideration? For example, in the remarks by the PS, the director talked about leasing idle land. We've had harsher discussions. We've had the president say, if you have idle thousands of acres, we will retake them, repossess, and put them into agricultural use. What is the solution?
Well, you know, as I go there, land fragmentation is now a critical problem. I teach land use law, and I spend time researching on this. And in my native Kiambu County, the average amount of land that is available, for example, through inheritance, is now at 1/8 of an acre and diminishing to the point where siblings can no longer even subdivide to obtain shares. And this is farmland. Kiambu County has 12 sub-counties, that's the constituencies. And perhaps maybe 4 or 5 are retaining any significant capability for agriculture production. The level of subdivision is therefore led very quickly by conversion of the use of land. And so we see that Kenya, for instance, has had the Land Control Board Act since independence that legally is permitted, land control boards are legally permitted to not allow the sale and subdivision of land. The law actually says if it's going to adversely affect agriculture production. Land control boards have become purveyors of this process of subdivision on a large scale. In fact, have become rubber stamps for the sake of that. And I know there is an attempt to amend that. County governments have got the power to approve land use conversion and zoning. And again, this hasn't been done with any measure of success. The effect of it is that the more we permit conversion of land and subdivision of land, and listen, it's a contestation between the right to own land and what we call the police power of the state in terms of Article 66(1) of the Constitution, which is to control land use in the public interest, right? And the police power of the state can only be exercised in a way that does not interfere with your property rights, but can reasonably, in the public interest, control how you use your land. And this is the base upon the basis for land use zoning regulations, etc. Now, if we don't resolve this, we will at some point begin to do the process of land consolidation at a very high cost if we are not careful. Now, you might recall that land consolidation was already done by the first government of independence, Kenya, isn't it? By Mzee Jomo Kenyatta's government, as they were trying to bring back parcels to provide meaningful production parcels of land. Now, subdivision that is leading to conversion of land without any control then has very many consequences. There's a time I stood on top of a building with my father and we were looking around the village, and I just had this sad realization that the tree cover that we used to have has diminished because the whole place has been replaced with construction. So then the question arises, where is the rain expected to come from? And number two, water that would seep into the ground, held by the trees and biodiversity, and recharge groundwater and make its way to the wetlands, etc., has now become storm water that is moving very fast and carrying everything with it. So the damage is rather cumulative and extensive. And I'll say here, we do have the constitutional authority, we do have the law in place to actually fix this. This is the reason why you saw buildings being demolished some years ago around rivers, etc., by government. So from a policy perspective, the problem now is not dealing with the fragmentation going forward. That can be dealt with because tools are in place. The problem is reversing the damage that has been caused for 2 or 3 decades, and it would come at significant political cost. It would require a lot of processes and to some extent the execution of compulsory acquisition, because we might need to revisit some of the uses are very damaging. But I would say that land fragmentation has got an implication. You asked about idle land, and I'll speak about that very quickly. Now, idle land, the term idle land only makes sense to anybody when you look at it from the production side. So if an agriculture minister or policy person or even a head of state is looking at it from agriculture production and they speak about idle land, it will make sense that that land is not being put to the intended use. But and the scientist is here, land is never idle. Land actually provides a lot of what we call ecological services. It is the one that contains plants that are allowing for photosynthesis and air movement, allowing for filtration, therefore we get clean water, etc., allowing for recreation, etc. So strictly speaking, land is not idle. It is only when it is looked at from the perspective of use. So that point about, for instance, taking land from public institutions and putting it to agriculture, that will make a great deal of sense because, well, it's not being put in use. But if we come to your land and say, you have got 2,000 acres and it's idle, you might raise an issue and tell us, but who told you the land is idle? I am benefiting the Republic of Kenya by providing ecosystem services. And that policy needs to understand that distinction. Thank you.
Thank you for that legal lesson. Finally, Mr. Mbugo, what is your take on the issue of repossession, forceful acquisition, as the legal people may call it, of the so-called idle land from the agricultural perspective? And as you talk to us about that, can you talk to us also about projects like Galana Kulalu and why it has not, would that be an example of government trying to do something on a large scale, and has it worked?
Repeat on the repossession, I didn't get you clearly.
What is your take on repossession? Should idle land be repossessed by government and put into agricultural use?
I think what the government needs to do is to respect the right and liberties of individuals, because the rights are protected. And we are well aware that even the fingers on the same hand are not equal. And there are people who need to be supported, because you may find that some of these lands are ancestral lands. Some have disputes and people have not benefited. Some are even having legal court battles. So I think the duty of government is to ensure that the citizens enjoy their rights, including the right to land use. And this is where incentives can be created to ensure that these lands can be turned into productivity. And we have seen this happening in a number of irrigation schemes. You can talk about rice and other areas. So I think it wouldn't be proper, but it's still to engage the citizenry and see how this land can be put into potential use. Like I can mention, the issue of drought and floods is not new. You remember even in the Bible, there were 7 years of drought and 7 years of prosperity. So I think land can be put into proper use, including now that we are having floods. We can have technologies and innovations where we can store huge amount of water below the land surface, so that during drought, and this is what has been said from COP27, that the climate change crisis is a crisis of water. So if we address the crisis of water, we are also addressing the issue of climate change. Which was the other question?
Galana Kulalo.
I don't have the facts because that one is shrouded in mystery. It's not understood clearly, because I think it was a very good innovation, because in terms of land use, this is what has happened in other jurisdictions, and especially Israel. But you will find that there are a lot of other things that I don't want to talk about too, that they are not good. But I think talking about such projects and upgrading, this works. It has been proven in other states. And if I come to the issue of land use, now that we have small pieces, this, in any challenge, you can also take an opportunity. Remember, a country like Israel is very small. You will be surprised. But look at the oranges that we are having now, the yellow oranges in our supermarkets. Where are they coming from? They're coming from Israel. And we are paying dearly. I think you are paying for an orange around, now it has gone to almost 40 shillings, that yellow orange. So I think we can also take advantage, and the young people, you don't need even land. Nowadays, with innovations, you can plant on top of a building. Just ensure you have the enough conditions that you need, the soil, the moisture, the quantity, and everything. So we can take advantage of that. So I don't support the repossession of land, because if you look at our country and the people who are living below the poverty line, you will find it's over 50%. Then it means we'll be converted into a state like Egypt, where 70% of the land is owned by the state.
Thank you for that. I would like to put one more question to each of you before we go to, we field some questions from the audience. And that is the issue of food processing. Mrs. Mongari, if I can begin with you, and value addition. Agriculture, like we mentioned earlier, is a devolved unit, is a function that county governments have a budget for. And we've seen some counties put up food processing plants. What are some of the opportunities that lie in the counties for that?
Ben, counties should embrace value addition, because you find that most of our the produce from the farmers is just raw, is not value added. It is imported out there, exported, and then it comes back value added and very expensive. If you go to some of these countries, you can't even afford the tea there, and yet we are the ones who grow it. Counties can start small by having a small processing. Let's say, for instance, a place where there's sunflower, the women group can be supported. They come up with processing of that sunflower so that it adds value. It's more valuable than the seed itself. So this is an area to invest in. And currently, there are a wave of, I could say, agro-processing parks. But what we should really look at first is the raw materials. We must have the raw materials to do value addition and agro-processing. You might come to a place and say, I have, like in Kisii or Nyamira, you have pineapples. But if you just do it in one day, it will not be enough. So what counties can do, they can have combine as counties, like we have regional blocks, so that they can have enough quantities to process. You might find I have bananas in this region, like the western region. They can come together so that they have those, if those industrial parks are in one area, so that they can have that product, and this will also add value. Then also farmers should come into cooperatives, because when they have cooperatives, it's easier for them to value add these products. Farmers, usually they are subjected to a lot of price fluctuations and all that. They are so disadvantaged, but once they are together, they have that bargaining power. They can be able to market collectively, even these value-added products. And the value-adding can occur from various stages, even after production, even cleaning, sorting, you know, that is adding value. So it's easier when you are together as farmers, yeah, and also do it together as counties in the regions.
Speaking of agro-processing, Dr. There's this belief that manufacturing or those plants should be left for big manufacturing companies. Are there opportunities for small-scale kind of manufacturing and still make a difference?
Yes, there is. But even before that, you know, when you talk about this question of food processing, value addition, and supply chain management, I'd like to just affirm that there are two parts to that. And I think Waziri here has spoken about the agriculture production part. I think we cannot say enough that resilient farming that is, you know, can withstand the various challenges to farmers we've been speaking of, including climate. It's important because that's the raw material. But when it comes to the other part now of supply chain management, value addition, food processing, you know, if you look at the county integrated development plan of almost any rural county in Kenya, this is a standard provision that they want to do. And it's been part of Vision 2030, MTPs, etc., to be done for a long time. And we've only seen just a handful of county governments actually put money and move along. And it tells you that there is room for private actors to do this, and to do this in what way? In my experience, I've handled processes and transactions that involve investment in solar cold storages, aggregation centers for vegetables and fruits like avocados that require processing. So solar cold storages and aggregation points that allow everybody from their little farm to bring together, and they can be stored, sorted, and they can be brought to market by somebody who buys to them on contract or does it. I also learned, for example, for avocados, there is less focus on sorting when you're producing oil than when you're selling the fresh fruit, for instance. So farmers who sell for oil production stand to make more money because the process cares less about the sorting. So there is I think the long and short of it, there are multiple experiments happening in the country involving counties and private actors using their own funds to provide for small-scale cold storage facilities. And when they are put together with aggregation, where there is somebody that is storing and then helping to market and process, then it actually works. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Because of time, we need to wind this up. Prof, very quickly, just 1 minute only. You walk into a supermarket in London and you buy premium tea, and they tell you this is British tea, but of course it's from Nyamira and Kericho. Do you believe that this value addition can reach the producer, that is the farmer?
Well, thanks, Ben. I think value addition has a purpose. Its purpose is to make it more quality and sell it at a higher premium, and that is okay. Processing is supposed to address the perishability, and of course the supply chain management has to do with the movement of food from point A to point B. Ben, holistically, what this is actually addressing is food loss and food waste, which accounts for a third of the food that is produced actually goes to waste. And from where I sit, I feel very strongly that we need to start dealing with that. And the first stop for dealing with food waste and food loss is the attitudinal change. And let me just give you a very basic analogy here. Do you know how many of us go into a restaurant and then after the meal, whatever is left on the plate, you just let it go? And do you know why we do that? It's because in Africa, the culture is that when I come to visit you as a host, if I eat, I'm not supposed to finish all the food on the plate, because then that would mean that I'm gluttonous and I'm not sensitive. And you as a host is also looking bad on you if I clear the food, because it means you didn't cook enough. But that social structure has a problem in terms of food waste. So the host cooks a lot more, and I also let it, and it goes to waste. So this is what I feel. We need to change our attitude and how we bond with our food. Even when you are leaving the hotel, there is this thing they call doggy bags. Even the name calling it doggy bag has already stigmatized that food, because you're taking it to the dogs. So what it then means, we need to figure out, even the manufacturers and processors, to put even a tagline around the foods that they're actually selling, by saying that wastage of 1 gram of this particular, probably, flour will mean this in terms of contributing to climate change and, of course, the food loss and all that. So we need to figure out how to deal with our attitude towards food.
Thanks, Prof. Mr. Mbugo, finally, what do you think, from where you sit, the government can do to boost value chain and supply chain management, to boost the trader, the consumer, as well as the producer?
So I think in terms of the value addition, that is key, because it should go a long way in improving the balance of payments, because you realize, as it has been said, if there is no the value addition, and you find that these commodities get outside the country, and when they come back, they are imports. So if the government is able to strengthen the value chain, and we have value addition in the country, you will find that we'll also limit import substitutes, and also strengthen local market production, and also enhanced revenues and improved, as you introduce the other value addition, you're also creating employment and solving the problem of unemployment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like now to go to the audience for any questions you may have. I'd like to kindly restrict your question to one per person. Make it very precise and quick. Let's start this side. That's the gentleman over there. Then we can come to this side. Kindly say who you're directing your question to. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Godwin from Democratic Action Party. My question goes to Waziri. If we look under Schedule 4 of the Constitution, we find that agriculture is one of the devolved functions to the county government. So my question is, how can the county government address the issue that, the mythological issue that surrounds the GMO? Because we find that in the county, that's where agriculture takes place in large quantities. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take another couple before. Yes, sir.
Okay. Also, I have one question for you. Now in Kenya the population is really growing, and you can see. So by 2030, we will be about 60 million people, for example. So what is your plan to make sure that we have enough food in the country come 2030?
Thank you. Let's take two more, then we go to the panelists for quick answers. We need a lady. We need a lady there, and then here. We need to balance this.
Thank you very much for the very insightful and informative panel discussion. My name is Shampiana. I am an indigenous youth from the Marsabit County. So my question is on ecology and culture. So my question goes to Professor Oduor. I'm wondering, is there a role that indigenous knowledge and practices play in the development and regulations of the GMO to ensure that they align well with the local values and needs? Thank you.
Thank you. One more, then we take some answers. To the lady in front.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Habiba Abdi. I am from Isiolo County, and I have a question and a suggestion. for the panelists. So my question goes to Mr. Anthony. You are CEO of WASPA and an expert in water and sanitation governance. So I'd like to know, from a report by the Star 2 days ago, it reported that Red Cross, together with the Meteorological Department of Kenya, has reported over 13,000 homes have been swept away with the El Nino. In terms of governance, is there something that the government can be able to come in and see what we can do to mitigate this issue? And because we are not only in the business of asking questions, I'd like to give a suggestion to the panelists. And this is something that Professor Richard and Dr. Robert had brought out very clearly in terms of matters of the youth, and the fact that the youth are not quite engaged in matters of agriculture. So I'd like to suggest the formation of a committee, a youth-based committee together with experts in that same field, to be able to assist in curating agricultural content that have, the youth appeal, so that this can be able to contribute greatly into having youth in this space. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we have a question for each of the panelists. Let's start with the last one, Mr. Ambugo, if you may.
Thank you. This is Habiba. I didn't get your question clearly, how it relates to sanitation and water governance, but I'm aware you are saying 13 homes have been swept away and Red Cross is involved. So what was your question?
My question is, in terms of governance with regards to water and stuff like that, are there systems that we can be able to put in place, infrastructure, governance-wise, policy-wise, that we can be able to either implement it already there, or if they are not, how can we go about, forming policies that can establish these structures in those places?
Okay, I get you clearly. I think this is a problem in terms of the floods, because I don't know how that structure is. But normally in the nation, you always have floodplains, like I'm from Budalangi, and it's very clear we have a floodplain. The government already in such a situation has taken measures, and alternative land is always available. But from our cultural beliefs, you will find there are people who say, my father was buried here, my grandfather was married here, I'll not move. So if it is in the floodplain, it becomes a challenge unless there are mitigation measures like upstream in terms of damming, and I know progressively government always has plans to address that. But already there is a national water master plan in terms of addressing issue to do with water and sanitation. And the sanitation policy is before cabinet. It has not been approved, but I think our coverage in terms of safely managed sanitation, which is a higher ladder. We are not talking basic, we are at 93%. But in terms of safely managed, we are very low at 29%. And I think when we have that policy in place, it will break the silos that happen in terms of sanitation governance, so that it is not domiciled in different ministries and you have a wide approach where these can be addressed together. So already there is a national water master plan to address that. So the other issue, it will depend if it's within the flood prone, then people are encouraged to move to higher, and the government will always. It is a big issue, and it's at times political, where people are resettled. I know it has not been easy, even in our place. People refused completely. So every time there is floods, unasikia, serikali saidia. You've heard that phrase, huh? Everything has gone. Thank you.
Thank you. Prof, there's a question for you on GMO.
Well, it was a question on ecology and culture, and GMO mixed in there. And I must say that truly any innovation that does not speak to culture straight away will not be adopted. And that's very normal. It's not restricted to only GMOs. I want to give you an example where it was important that it has to happen. Previously, all the people who were diabetic, before the emergence of GMO technology, we were purifying insulin from pigs. So you get the blood purified, and then the insulin is what you use for, to take care of the diabetic brothers and sisters. And that did not speak very well to the culture and religion of the Muslims. So they were just like, it is okay with your insulin, you can actually, keep it. until GMO technology came in, where now we asked ourselves one single question, that if the senior counsel here is not diabetic, it means the DNA that is responsible for producing insulin is correct. So what did we do? We purified that DNA in what we call the extract construct, then put it in E. coli in a bacteria so that the bacteria produces insulin. So as we are talking right now, all the people world over, the insulin that is available is GMO, but you never hear people talking about it. And yet we have been, globally, there is no organic, insulin. Nobody talks about it. And that's an example of how technology must speak to the culture, and it really helped. And many, many other diseases, including the COVID. Recently, you were hearing the vaccine. It was RNA, that was DNA sequence that we were injecting. And nobody also talked. I was waiting for anti-GMOs people to be on the street. They never got there. So the discussion around GMO is usually a convenient statement. And I want to tell you that it is safe, and we make it here at Kenyatta University. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Prof. Dr. There's a question for you on the, very quickly, 1 minute, population vis-a-vis food security from the gentleman.
All right, well, thank you very much on that question. This is about, the population is increasing and what can we do to increase food security. I think we need to look at this from the perspective that we don't have a choice but to deal with food security, and we need to embrace innovations, whether it is from the perspective of technology, whether it's the perspective of the models that we use to farm. For example, since we are already here and land fragmentation is here with us, we need to explore and take up models of farming that are compatible with the fragmentation that, even as we prevent it from happening further, we need to do that so we need to explore what innovations are working with us. And still on that, from the GMO perspective, from a human rights perspective, being culturally sensitive is a requirement when we are implementing certain things.
Sorry, we can't take all the questions.
Thank you. My name is Kome. My question is on a GMO. For example, you realize that BT cotton is being given by government in some counties, and you realize that the cost is high to affordability in terms of the customer who is a small-scale farmer. So what is it that you're doing in terms of costs and subsidies to ensure that even as we get to the farmers, they are able to afford? And secondly, what are you doing in terms of public participation? Because it's all about acceptability. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Prof, finally, have the final word, please. Summarize in 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. I think the question about small-scale farmers and preservation, that's a very valid question, and a lot of it is just as a result of ignorance. If the small-scale farmers harvest and they have good harvest, it is just a little bit of strategy to wait a little longer so that you can sell at the right point. Ordinarily, you will find that the prices fall during harvest, and a month or two later, they have already skyrocketed. So for me, it's about capacity building and also just availing different mechanisms for storage so that even after 3, 4, 5 months, the maize is still good for consumption and has lower levels of aflatoxin. So let's explore mechanisms that are there for storage, and also value addition is very important. But more importantly, I think we need to start looking at the farmers, consolidating them around the circles or chamas so that we can train them in that particular platform. But more importantly, the Ministry of Agriculture, I think, can use the current mobile telephony in terms of communicating, because most of those farmers also have mobile phones, and we have modules that we can actually send to them in terms of preservation, selection of storage, and probably the kind of the crop that can stay a little longer. All those are part of that. But in terms of GMO and BT cotton and cost and subsidies, that is very interesting because there is this assumption that seeds, ordinary seeds, are not bought every season. And
such a lovely audience. My apologies for being late for lunch. Thank you so much. My name is Ben Fitili. Up next is lunch. We'll have a couple of announcements on that shortly. Many thanks.